So I would like to welcome everyone connected over this Google Meet to our virtual workshop on making policy paper. I am Upendra Musal, the moderator of this session and the policy director of the Food and Agriculture Youth Institute. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with all us today. So before dividing into the session, so let me briefly introduce about FAYI. FAYI is an independent committee of IAAS. IAAS is the International Association of Students in Agriculture and Related Science, which is an organization that binds together all students worldwide with a similar dream and idea for the agriculture and related science. It has the network over 50 countries containing more than 10,000 members. As a FAI member, we are a dynamic and forward-thinking organization dedicated to empowering the next generation of agricultural leaders. We are passionate about addressing critical issues in agriculture, food security, and climate change. Our mission is to co-create the future that align the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we believe in the power of youth in achieving this vision. At FAI, we recognize that youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow. Our work mainly focuses on equipping young professionals and students with knowledge, skill, and confidence they need to actively engage in policy development and advocacy. We believe that by nurturing young talent and providing right tools, we can create more sustainable, equitable, and prosperous world for everyone. Now, let's talk about what brings us here today. Our virtual workshop, Making Policy Paper, is a part of our ongoing commitment to empower youth in agriculture and policy making. We understand that policy papers are the powerful instrument for change. They provide means to influence and shape decisions that affect the agricultural practice, food security, and our response to climate change. In today's workshop, we aim to explore the scenario of crafting effective policy paper. We will involve into the fundamental key component, practical tips, and real-world application. But first, let me allow to introduce our esteemed trainer, Mr. Rajan Thapa. With his extensive experience in policy development and management, he is the ideal guide for this workshop. Having said that, I request Rajan sir to say a few words to our participants before we start the session. Rajan sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Upendra, and thank you very much for the whole organizing team for inviting me to this session. And basically, like giving my introduction, currently I'm affiliated with the Ministry of Forest and Environment, implementing Global Environment Facility project that is funded by JEF, and partly I'm also representing WWF Nepal. So looking to my experience, I have been working in climate change sector more than 14 to 15 years. Beside that, I'm also engaged in academic sector. I'm the lecturer for Department of Environment Science, part multiple campus, where I'm lecturing MSc Environment Science. Basically, my core subject is more focusing on climate change, ecology, and air pollution. So in my whole career, I have been working in air pollution, climate change, and environmental safeguard. So today I'm looking forward to have a very interactive session so that I could also share some of my experience while formulating the policies, policy advocacy, and what are the essential things that we need to undertake while we design the policy or the policy briefing. So I really look forward to have your interactive participation to this session. Thank you.
Okay, so it's an absolute honor to have you, sir, in our session. So with this stage set, we'll now delve into the heart of our workshop. So Mr. Rajan Thapa will lead us through the process of crafting effective policy paper and policy paper making process. Please ensure your notepad are at the ready, and we have the wealth of insight to share with you. We want to make this workshop as engaging and interactive as possible. So your participation is encouraged. I request everyone to use the chat feature to post your question, thought, and comment throughout the session. We value your insight and collective knowledge of our participants. Remember, the more you engage you are, the more you will take away from this session. Now, Without any further ado, I allow Mr. Rajan sir to take over this session forward. Rajan sir, once again, the floor is yours.
So thank you. So meanwhile, I'm sharing my screen. So I will also ask one of the organizer to assist me, because we never know that when this internet could interrupt. So maybe in between that, you can just allow me if there is any kind of interruption, you just message me or text me. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Once again, thank you and welcome everyone. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about making policy brief. So in title, it is mentioned about making policy paper, but before we jump to the policy paper, there are some key essential things that we need to understand, because there is policy, there is policy paper, there is policy brief. So there are different terminologies that has been used while designing the policies or the policy brief or the policy paper. So today I'm going to touch a little bit upon all three fundamentals, because all three fundamentals are very much essential to understand. And after knowing what is policy brief, or when we formulate policy papers, it allows us to advocate or to strengthen our policy advocacy to the right person at the right time. So my content basically focused on understanding policy and policy briefs. Similarly, I will be touched upon policy formulation process, making policy brief, and at the end, I will also expecting questions from you all, so that we could have a more interactive session at the end. To begin with, what do you think the policy is? So every country, every organization, or every institutions, they have their individual policies, or they have individual roles, responsibility, or the governing structure. But all those policy documents, governing structure, they design to achieve some kind of objective or some sorts of goals. So policy is a decision-making framework or course of action to achieve a desired effect or change. Because when we look at to Nepal, in 2015, we have new constituency, and that constituency was formulated to have a tremendous change in Nepal. That change either for governing structure, either for the whole structure of Nepal, or to give some kind of authority, some kind of right to the citizen. So policy, it always carry the voice of citizen, voice of people, or voice of that individual who are associated with that particular organization. Similarly, policy is a set of principles that represent the end result of a decision as to how best to achieve the set objective. Because without formulating the objective, or without setting any kind of goal, sometimes it is very difficult to walk through that pathway. So for any organization or for any country, a policy, it serves as a guiding dog or the suggestive pathway, so that they could look forward, to achieve their desired goals or objectives. And it is also a function of politics, because many of the policy work, it has been started from the political discourse. In the case of Nepal, we have different political parties. They have different kind of agenda. They have different kind of views. They usually rule the government, and sometimes they stay in opposition party. But their roles and responsibility is particularly focusing on designing the policies or implementing those policies to make our nations prosperous. So that means policy is also very much linked to the politics. And the last thing is, politics is also a function of art and science of power. because without having a political discourse, without having a policy discourse, and without having a appropriate evidence, that policy does not make any sense. So to have a proper policy on hand, we need to have a evidence, we need to have that kind of ability to frame all those evidences in single framework, so that we could communicate what is essential for the public, or what is essential for that individual person working in individual organization. So here you can see one diagram which elaborates more about its linkages. Like we have three factors. One is external influences. Second one is political context. And there are two other links and evidence. So looking to the political context and evidence, there is a one interaction point, or the interlinked point, that is policy analysis and research. Because when there is a political discourse on, or when the political party, they think that it's a time to have a new policy on board, they often go for some kind of research, they often go for some kind of discourse, or do some kind of research or learning thinking. Similarly, there is a linkage between the external influences and the link, because there are some there are some media advocacy networking, and there are some political and policy making thing. And all those media advocacy and networking, or other individual network, they play a role of championing or lobbying, or sometimes they also provide some sorts of information, or the external information that influences those political leaders to design appropriate policy. And the last thing is the inclusion of scientific information exchange and validation, because sometimes people, they use to cite the information, but before citing those information, we also need to check whether that information is valid, whether that information is appropriate to that particular nation, particular organization, or that particular individual. So validation, check, recheck is a very essential. So all these fundamentals are the key factor, or the key influencing factor to design the policy. Then what is policy brief? The policy brief is a tool to present research and recommendation to non-specialized audience, because the specialized means, like sometimes the policy is being formed within the boundary of political leaders, or within the boundary of policy developer, but this policy brief includes those who are not included in policy designing process or the policy formulation process. For example, Nepal has recently formulated its national climate change policy. And while formulating that national climate change policy, they have invited experts from different sectors, the representatives from many different ministries, and the representatives from the academic and research institutions. But they failed to involve or engage youth or the other external stakeholder to communicate that policy, or to pass the information to that particular group who were not included in the beginning of that policy formulation process. For them, this policy brief could play a significant role to capture what has been included in that particular policy and how they could be benefited. Similarly, clear and concise standalone document that focuses on a single topic, because this policy or policy paper is also a kind of research document. In single document, we cannot include different findings or different research document, because the research means a standalone theme, or for the definition, it's a searching again and again. That means, like, to identify the problem or to give some sort of solution, we must need to undergo through different level of research. And That is one standalone theme. So policy brief is somehow similar to that research work, which could convey some level of or some sorts of information to that particular group or particular audiences. So similarly, this research paper, it's usually it organized in plain language, draws a clear links to policy initiatives, because sometimes the policy paper gives the rationale, sometimes it gives the glimpses of gaps, like where is the gap and how we could mitigate that gap. And lastly, it also gives some kind of views to implement those policy frameworks. So, to summarize the policy brief, it is a complete document which guide to identify the gap, which gives some idea to minimize that gap and support policymakers to implement that particular policy. Then, how the policy is being formed. So in the case of Nepal, giving the example, like when the nation, they feel that there is a need of some policy, they usually start the policy formulation process. So since I'm from the climate change background, early in 2010, like there was a huge discourse about climate change. The many people, they started demanding a separate policy for responding climate needs or responding the voices of climate vulnerables. Then government also thought that it is very essential. Then they call for a kind of concept note, what are the fundamentals that should included in climate change policy. So during that period, multiple stakeholders were engaged, including political leaders, policy makers, experts, academia, and research institutions. So, and during that process, like they organized different tier of discussion, different tier of validation workshops, training, and finally they did this writing workshop. So that's how the policy was formed in 2011. So the discourse was started in 2010, like the need of the government, actually they realized the need of climate change policy, and the policy was formulated in the year 2011. So that means it took almost 1 year to formulate one single policy. So that means sometimes the policy formulation process is very tedious, and the policy, it represents the whole nation. Sometimes the policy represents whole society, or for the organization, policy represents the structure of that particular organization. So while formulating the policy, like the policy makers should always give their special emphasis to govern the whole organization or whole country. So the policy is formed through multi-layer of advocacy. So as I already mentioned, for the climate change policy, the discourse was started in 2011 when there was a national climate adaptation program of action, and then they identified the need and they started the formulation of policy. So to have a similar kind of discourse, first we need to build evidence based on analysis. Second, the engagement with the development, planning, and policy debates, because these debates, it is a very critical thing, because in debate there is a kind of rule that you can propose your disagreement. Sometimes you can propose your agreement to that particular statement. So it is always depend like how you are engaging in that process. So your engagement is very important. And the third thing is influence, like how you are influencing policymakers. Because for example, today, like almost all the participants are from agriculture background, or you are representing different agriculture institutes, or you are particularly from the youth background. So for you, your key interest area is influencing policymakers to include youth agenda in that particular policy. So to include that, you are one of the important stakeholder in that policy making process. First, you have to influence those policymakers so that they could invite you in that discourse. They could hear you, or they could hear your voice or your agenda, and finally they could agree that okay, it is very important that we need to include some agenda that is directly or indirectly related to youth. So that kind of influencing power has to, or that kind of influencing uh, power is with the external stakeholder. So it is always depend on you, like how you influence the policymaker, or how you engage yourself, or how you build the evidences, or how you collect those evidences and communicate it rightly with the proper analysis. Summarizing, to create, to reform and change policy, and to ensure that the policy are implemented properly, your participation is very important. So sometimes there might be some question like, okay, it is true, but what else if I'm not invited? What else if I'm not included in policy making process? Then to respond that need, like there is an opportunity to create a policy paper or the policy brief, like where you could independently propose your agenda, your needs, your requirement, and how the government should include youth in that particular policy document. So requirement in the policy process. So first, you need to be very analytical. Like before you ask the government or any entity to include you in that process, first you need to be very analytical, undertake research and understand what the data and the information reflect. Like for example, you are from agriculture background, there is a policy related to agriculture, and if you and government is going to revise that policy and you want to be a part of that, then first ensure that you have enough understanding of the previous policy. You have identified what were the gap, and you have also identified what could be the possible opportunities to include the youth or other broader agriculture stakeholder. So if you have that kind of analytical power, or if you have that kind of analytical skills, then it will be very much easy for you to be a part of that policy making process. Second, find a position. So during the policy formulation process, making your position or making your statement is very crucial. Because sometimes or often we present as a flexible entity or the flexible entity. Like if somebody says A is right, then we tend to say, okay, A is right. And some next portion, they propose that no, A is wrong, B is right. Then we tend to say that, okay, B is right. No, like it doesn't work. Like for that, like you need to identify your position. Either position A is okay, or either position B should be fine. So find your position, identify what needs to be changed. Like for agriculture student, like if you want to reform the agriculture policy, or you want to have some kind of revolution in agricultural sector, then identify your position. But that should be politically, economically, and culturally validated. Because like it is true that policy, it often face some kind of criticism. People often criticize the policies, but beyond that, like it is also important that policy should be neutral, inclusive, and it should include all, and it should ensure the principle that leaving no one behind. So to make your position, you should be politically, economically, and culturally sound. Third, stay focused. Make sure to follow a process, because like sometimes like for youth, it is difficult to follow a process. difficult to participate every, you have a different kind of responsibility of study, responsibility of fulfillment of academic assignment, and other responsibility. And if you fail to attain some discourse, then often the policymaker used to question you, like you were not in the previous discussion, and it is very difficult for you to capture the essence of the previous discourse. And they often like uh, re- re- refuse you to be a part of that process again. So try to be focused, try to ensure that you have enough and adequate information of every discourse. And if there are anyone like who could like provide you or communicate you the information, use that information to advocate yourself, advocate to policymakers, and ultimately it also help you that you are within that process and you are very much focused to that particular agenda. And the last one is be strategic, because the next phase outline strategy to address the identified challenges. Because sometimes this being strategic also helps you to identify like how you are a problem solver, not just raising the question. Generally demand their position, they usually demand to be a part of this process, or they usually demand like this is wrong, or they should be a part of certain discourse like that. But if you present with some sorts of solution, or if you come up with some kind of guidance with a proper document, then you could be think that you are very strategic and you have a solution oriented document. So try to be strategic yourself. Then, how to transfer policy to policy brief or policy paper. So for every task, we cannot do it alone, because like my need might not capture other need. So if you are together, your voices could be captured. So we must work with others and build a strong partnership for making policy brief or the policy paper. Partnership, uniting the youths, or the principle of togetherness is very much essential, because together we are stronger and together it is possible. So there are certain steps, like if you put one policy in the center, like for example, let's say agricultural policy that is going to revised by the government, and all the agricultural students, they have a kind of task that they are analyzing what were the gaps in previous policy, and how the government should address that gap, and how they should implement the new policy. So that is a basket. Then first, your starting point is analysis the policy. First, you should go to the previous policy. You should go to the intensive text research. Like you could identify several policy documents, several literatures related to the similar kind of policies. There might be similar kind of policies from a neighboring country. So first, you should go and analyze that policies. Then identify what are the policy issues, what is missing, and what should government address, and identify your position, what you want to include in new policy. The third step is set a policy goal, desired outcome, and define the target. Without any goal, without envisioning the outcomes, or without setting a targets, your policy paper is just useless. You usually put your effort, but you never know like whether it will play a significant role or not. But if you have a goal, if you have set your desired outcomes, or if you have set targets, then usually it determines your voice. It ultimately pressurizes other stakeholder to include your voice. So it also supports you to identify your message, or it also supports you to identify the message of other people or the other stakeholder who are engaged in agriculture sector. So try to be very specific while identifying the message. Then the another step is identifying the like-minded institute or like-minded agencies, because as I already mentioned, like together we are strong. So if you have a like-minded agency together, then it will be very much easy for you to pitch your idea, your agenda, or your statement boldly to the policymakers, or while drafting your policy paper, and define the strategy. So this stage is for like a recommendation, like after identifying the gap, after identifying your position, after identifying the partners or allies. Now this is the stage you recommend, like how that policy maker should work forward, how they should include the leftover things, or how they should respond the issues that particularly related to the agriculture. And the second last thing is plan of implementation. If you give some kind of recommendations or some kind of roadmap that how the stakeholder could implement the new policy, then it could add more value or more flavor or more spices to your policy paper. And the last thing is plan for monitoring and evaluation. So one policy paper, it gives some kind of strategy, some kind of the guiding steps. But if you have a proper monitoring and evaluation, it will also give another opportunity to measure your success, whether your policy brief has reached to that particular audience who are engaged in that policy formulation process, whether your policy brief has reached to that individual persons whose voice is very important to that particular policy. So that kind of monitoring evaluation influence you to draft another policy paper is more inclusive, more direct, and more evident, which could also pressurize policymakers to include your voice or to include the issues of that particular agencies or that particular group who are linked to agriculture. So this is how we could transfer the whole policy to the policy brief or the policy paper. So here you can say that policy brief is the summary version of the policy. It also identifies some kind of gap, but at the meantime, it also guides policy makers to implement or to minimize that identified gap while implementing those policies and framework. So now I'll go to the template, like how we could design the policy paper or policy brief. So first thing is executive summary. So there is no hard and fast rule like how much word or how many paragraph or how many sentence that you should write in the executive summary. But if you are very much specific, then it is very good, because sometimes the audience, they more prefer to read the executive summary rather than go through paragraph to paragraph. So first, every policy brief should open up with a short summary, like why you are writing this policy brief, what sorts of thing that this policy brief has included, and to whom this policy paper is targeted. Second is, this could be a bullet point or short paragraph or two. So it depends on you and it depends on your need, like how you want to design. And another important thing is like which style you choose, because like sometimes the summary, it just represents the glimpses of overall study or the overall research, sometimes the executive summary, it also uses some recommendations in the beginning so that the audience feel connected to the issues that has been raised by this particular policy paper. And the last one is the executive summary should always appear on the cover of the brief or at the top of the first page so that it is the first thing that a reader will see. Second one is after the executive summary, then you should go with the introduction. The introduction should set up the rest of the document and clearly convey your argument. So sometimes the argument is used to define as a negative word, but in policy or in law, argument is very important. So argument is a statement, argument is a logic, and argument is providing a reason why this is important, why this is right, or why this is wrong. So in the introduction, if you have a sound or organized argument, then your policy paper could be more crisp and clear. So try to be very specific while providing the introduction of your policy paper. And the second thing is the goal is to leave your readers with a clear sense what your research is about. Because like if you fail to connect your audience that what you are trying to convey or what kind of message that you want to convey to your audience, then your paper often take it as a just a document, not as a document which could create some kind of change or which could bring some kind of change to that particular audience or to that particular readers. So try to be very specific, try to capture the emotions of your audience so that they feel that they are connected and they feel that you are raising their agenda in policy paper. The third thing is your research overview, rationale, and finding the gap. So in the intro part, you just provide the overview, what is there and why you feel that this policy brief is important and what kind of message that you are trying to convey. But in this section, you will dig out more rationally, like where is the gap? Why you feel that some group are excluded in that particular agriculture related policy? Or even making more specific, you could identify, like for example, the farmers, they are not getting benefit, or the farmers, they are not getting some kind of refund who is being impacted by climate induced hazards or climate induced disaster. So if you are trying to be more specific, your audience, they feel that they are very much connected to your research paper. So try to be very specific while designing your rationale, need, and also identifying the gap. In effect, this section describes the problem that your policy recommendation intend to solve. Because raising the problem or identifying the gap would be easy for the people, but giving the solution or solution-oriented document is often difficult. So if you possess yourself that you are a problem solver, then the people, they feel that you are someone like who have that kind of ability to carry over your voice and to give some kind of roadmap so that you could or they could minimize the whatever the impact they have faced due to climate change in their agricultural sector. The fourth thing is discussion analysis of research finding. So in your policy paper, you have identified that in community A, 90% of farmers, they are suffering because of heavy rainfall in post-monsoon. And you are trying to convey that the 90% of farmers, they are failed to get incentives from the government institutions, although there is a clear provision in the policy. Then first, you need to analyze how the farmers are being impacted. Either that is just from the climate induced hazard, either there is no inclusive policies at a local level, although there is an inclusive policy in the national level, whether there is a sort of finance, that is domestic finance or local finance or the national finance. So whatever the gap, so try to be analytical so that you have a more insights in your research findings. And the goal is to be convincing, but ensure your analysis is balanced and defendable and even evidence based. Because in policy, or after you release your policy brief or policy paper, audience, they may have question, they may raise a different kind of argument, and they could argue you about your findings. But being a policy paper author or designer, you need to address those questions raised by that concerned agencies. So if you have a proper information, if you have a evidence-based or proven information from the field, it is always easy for you to respond the question that has been raised by the audience. And here you should try to avoid a biasness. Sometimes researchers could bias, but in policy, there is no rule that you should bias or you should take the granted of one particular group and excluding some community. So try to be inclusive and balanced while you are releasing your paper. The last one is conclusion and recommendation. This is the final section, and you should detail the action recommended by the research findings. So here you cannot just recommend it by your thought. Here you should reflect the voice of that particular group, that particular community, or that particular individuals who are suffering the most, and draw the link for the audience between the research findings and your recommendations. Sometimes your recommendation could be high in the sky, and that particular audience will be nowhere. So if you are carrying over the voice of the vulnerables, then you should interlink how your recommendations could help those victims to minimize those climatic impacts. Similarly, use the clear language, because in policy, there is no some kind of authority that you could use complicated language or complicated paraphrase so that people, they don't understand what you are trying to convey or what you are trying to recommend to the policymakers. So if you are very much clear, if you are using a very clear language, then it will be very easy for the audience to understand, or easy for them to convey or communicate this message to other internal and external influencers. So try to be very clear in language, in statement, and in communicating your finding and your recommendation. And the last thing is that you want your readers to be convinced that you or your advice is best, and you are the one who is taking care of that particular group, or you are taking care or communicating their agenda to the policymakers. Because making a policy brief could be one exercise, but taking the voice or taking the responsibility of that particular group is the responsibility. So if you are formulating the policy paper, you have the responsibility to carry over the voice, to carry over the needs, and to provide some kind of solutions to that particular group. So where to use policy brief? A good policy brief can play an instrumental role in communicating the policy and its implication, because as I already mentioned that it is not a document, it is a guiding doc that also supports in implementation. And it also helped to fill the gap in policy implementation. It is not just raise the gap, but also provide some level of information, some guidance to implement or to minimize that particular gap. So, what are the key takeaways? One, understand the current policy landscape. So, since you are trying to capture climate change, agriculture, youth, and other issues related to your scoping area. So, first, understand what are the current policy landscape. Second, decide whether you want to influence or to inform policy. If you want to influence policymaker, then it is a very comprehensive exercise that you are tend to do. But if you are trying to inform the policy, then it is just a summary of the policy document that you are translating in local language or simple version and just disseminating it to the local people or the local audience. So it depends on you, like whether you want to be an influencer or you just want to be a communicator. Third one is use clear, easy, and understandable language so that your readers, your audience, or the people like who you want to represent, they feel that they are very much connected. And the last thing is share your brief within and outside your academic bubbles, because putting you in certain boundary is okay, but if you want to think in larger picture, or if you want to cross that boundary, then you must to run, or you must to get out from your boundary and try to capture the essence of whole community or the wider audience. So it depends on you, like whether you want to focus on particular group or whether your policy paper should capture the essence or emotions or need of wider stakeholder or audience. So here you must need to be crisp, clear, specific, target oriented, try to be influencing to the policymakers and capture the broader policy landscape. Here I stop. If there is any questions, queries, then I would be happy to respond. So over to you, Upendra.
Okay, so it was wonderful session, sir. Actually, so with the like all said, the session, the presentation session has been like indeed. So thank you so much, sir, for your session. So it feels amazed that how policy making process are being processed and this policy finally takes some action into the local, national, regional, and the global level. So having said that, I'd like to open for the floor for question answer session. So participants, if you have any kind of question to ask to our trainer, you may raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask a question. If you feel uncomfortable for unmuting, you can also address your question in the chat section. We'll take that question to our trainer. So your inquiries and the question are very much important in this session. So please don't hesitate to ask anything related to policy paper development. So I request everyone to drop your question. So we'll be taking some question. So yeah, so what is the role of negotiation in policy brief? So we have getting the question from Elena.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Elena. So negotiation is just some kind of discussion. So usually negotiation means compromisation in some particular definition. But in the policy making process, it is not about the negotiating something. It is about the discourse. So in every policy process, so negotiation is very important. So where the people, they often bring the issues from the community, the issues from that particular group, and try to convey where is the need and how the policymakers should include. And during that phase, the policymakers, they often used to say that we have already included the voice of that group. We have already included whatever the information you are trying to convey. So that dialogue between the influencer and the policymaker is a negotiation. So here you need to be very clear whether you want to include your agenda in that particular policy document, or you just take it back by saying that, okay, I have already raised my question to the policymaker and it's okay that they have heard it, and it totally depends on them, like whether they should include it or not. So negotiation is very important while like formulating, designing the policy. So there is another question: do research paper and policy paper have a different format? Yes, obviously. So research, there is a different kind of research. So there is academic research. So academic research it tends to identify some problem in certain subject and give some level of solutions or some level of findings or communicate some information gap to the audience. But in the policy, so the research means like the analyzing where is the gap in that particular policies, or if the policy is already been in implementation phase, here like you should identify like where is the gap while implementing that policy, whether that policy is implemented efficiently, effectively, and reach out to that targeted population or not. So that is a kind of research. But if you define it in a larger form, then definitely the policy and the research is two different things. And within the policy, the research could be one exercise or one important factor. There is another question from Abu. Difference between the different policy papers such as position paper, white paper, discussion paper, etc. What are the types? So yes, obviously. So position paper, it reflects your position. Like what is your position? Like for example, so we are very close to COP28. So from the end of this month, like there will be the climate change negotiation that will be held in Dubai. And before presenting in Dubai, like government of Nepal, they have actually they are working on the position paper. This position paper reflects the Nepal's position in COP28. Like what could be our agenda? What are the positions that we will raise to the global leaders? And what will be the key issues that we will demand? So that is our position. White papers, and there is like in the case of Nepal, like we have red book as well. So these are also a policy documents. So red book, it's a mandatory document. White book or white paper, it usually reflects the elaborated version of the policies. So the position paper is different. White papers, red book, red paper, like it is a part of the policy documents. But you cannot or for the general people, like you cannot publish a white paper or the red book. Like in the case of Nepal, the red book is solely under the government of Nepal. They publish their self the red book or the paper. But for the audience or for the stakeholder like us, we usually prepare position paper. We usually prepare policy brief or policy summary or the policy papers. Upendra, questions from Hemant. What strategy can be employed to engage stakeholder both within and outside in the government while the policy making process? So yes, so there are two different approaches that usually government adopts. One is inclusive approach. So in the inclusive approach, they usually invite all the stakeholders or the representatives from the concerning agencies, including youths, academic, research institutions, like-minded institutions, indigenous people, or the other general citizens. And there is another approach, that is targeted approach. So in that targeted approach, government, they invite targeted people so that they could contribute to the policy making process. So here, like you need to be very specific. Like if you want to be a part of that policy making process, so you need to meet the policymakers. You need to convey that you are the important entity to be a part of that process, and you have that kind of informations, or you have that kind of analytical skills that you could provide some kind of guidance, or you could provide some sorts of information to the policy makers. If you are not included in that process, then there is another options. If the government is targeting some people or some stakeholder, then try to convey your message through that stakeholder, so that they could communicate your message to the policy makers, so that your voices should be included in that process. So this is how the policy is being formed in Nepal. So in the context of climate and agriculture policy, what are the main challenges policymakers often encounter, and how can policy paper address this challenge? Okay, so very good question. Actually, like in the case of Nepal, we lack on the data, especially the information, or especially the evidence. So in the case of climate change, now we have some level of the data. We have a monitoring station in different location, and usually the government of Nepal, they said that we have a comprehensive sets of data. But when we look at to the historical data, or the data of micro region, or the micro area, then often we lack on that part. So the critical thing is we don't have that kind of reliable information or the evidences from the ground. So for the agriculture also the same, usually the government, they make some kind of survey, and they compile the information and communicate to the larger audience. But when we ask them the specific data or specific information, they always fail to give those kind of information. So that are missing in the current policies. Either that is for the climate change, or either that is related to the agriculture, because due to the climate change, there is a massive loss and damage in the agricultural sector. But when we ask government that how much loss and damage has been occurred due to climate induced disaster this year, then few of the organizations, they could provide the information, but there is a huge chances that the information might not be reliable. So while making the policies, or while making the climate agriculture inclusive policies, we must need to have reliable information, evidence, or the data that should generate it from the ground or communicated from the ground, so that we could include the microclimate, micro region, or the micro group, so that that policy should also integrate the small audience to wider stakeholder. What are the strategies can be employed to engage stakeholder? I think I have been already addressed this question. Another question from Sudhir. Can you share insights on how the balance the need for evidence-based policy with often rapidly changing realities of climate and agricultural issues? Yes, so in the case of climate change, we are usually taking the baseline, and on the basis of baseline, we project the trend and scenario of climate change, and on the basis of trend and scenario, we calculate climate risks and vulnerabilities, and this is how the policy is being formulated. So if you look at the climate change policy 2019, National Climate Change Policy 2019, we have take a reference data of 2017, and to generate the baseline, there was a kind of analysis of past 30 years data. So to make a balanced policy, there is always a need of past evidence over the past data, and that usually calculated from the baseline and projected by using different modules, and by using different framework suggested by United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. So this is the current practice that we are using. And similarly, in the case of agriculture as well, if you see the current information related to agriculture, for example, the production of rice, the loss and damage in agricultural sector. They have been using the data of starting from 1974 to 2019. But I'm not sure that whether that information is right or wrong, but somehow the government is using the historic data or the past trend data. So that is being used to make a balanced policies. But having said that, it is still not well enough to capture the essence, or it is still not well enough to have a real scenario or real picture of the gap that is there in the field. I was talking about the format. I have seen the similar writing format between the academic research paper and policy paper. Abstract, introduction, analysis, discussion, conclusion. Yes, so in the academic research, so there are some other sections as well. So executive summary is also being used in the academic research, and usually the abstract is also in practice. And at the meantime, there is an intensive chapter for literature review, and where you should go through the intensive literature review, and also go and identify your population size, sample size, and what are the methodologies that you have been designed to undertake that research, and how you deploy your research work like that. But in the policy paper, it is not very much essential to elaborate more on the process. Here, the more essential thing is your findings, what are the key essential thing that you have identified while undertaking the review of policies, or while undertaking or analyzing the gap of policy implementation in that field. So some of the outline or some of the title of the research and academic research and policy paper might be similar, but if we differentiate it, then academic research is very fast and very intensive, while the research paper is a articulation or the summary version of one particular policy. There is another question. How do you see the role of youth and young professionals in shaping the policy decision? So, so actually, in the current scenario, now the situation has been changed. In our phase, when I was representing a youth in early 2009-10, there was a huge issues related to the youth and youth involvement in the policy process. So during that period, a government, they usually thought that youths are just demanding, and youth are just protesting, or youth are representing some political parties. Now the discourse has been changed. Now the youth, they became a critical thinker, or the think tanker who could provide some sorts of knowledge, or could provide some level of information, and could be the problem solver. But at the meantime, it is also essential to identify yourself, who you are. Are you change maker? Are you problem solver? Or you are extremist? Because I have been seeing that some of the youth, within us, we are extremists. We always making ourselves demanding person, or always putting our grievances. For example, if government is proposing one policies, we put ourselves in the front of putting our argument, no, this policy is not required, you have failed to include youth, you have failed to include this kind of agenda, though that blah blah blah. So we usually raise the questions, or usually put our grievances. But the policymakers, they want that you are a problem solver. You have some kind of willpower that you could also provide some kind of guidance, or some kind of the information, so that the policymakers also include you in that designing process. So first and foremost thing is identify yourself, who you are. And I suggest you that you must act as a change maker, and you should not act as an extremist, but provide or present there with some information or some sorts of the solutions that you could provide to the policymakers. Elena, when a country uses a white phosphorus to burn another country's green areas, who to blame? So, so it's very tricky. Like actually, like in the case of climate change as well, like if you see the stake of Nepal, like we are just emitting 0.056% of total global emission. And when we see the impact, like we are like actually facing the severe impact of climate change. So whom to blame? So currently, like Nepal, like we are asking for the assistance from the developed country who are responsible for the historic emission of greenhouse gas. So similar thing could apply here. So we really need justice. Either that is climate justice, or that is a justice that is related to agriculture or in the area that you are raising. So it is not about blaming each other. It is about the raising, or it is about the right. You have the right that you could raise, and you have the right that you should live in clean and safe environment. And we need to ensure the similar kind of environment for our future generation as well. So there is no hard and fast rule or hard and fast thing that you should blame, but you should urge or you should demand that we need justice. And it is full authority for you to demand the justice. And it is also guided by our constitutions. And in the global context as well, we have that kind of right that we could demand our justice, or we could demand to put our position forward. So it's a 40,000 tree bond. So yeah, definitely. Like in the case of Nepal as well, like there is a discussion going on about the construction of new airport, and the youths, they are protesting. And like for example, even me, like the environment professional in Nepal, like we are urging that like before you go with a new development practice, like there are other opportunities, or there are other ways that you could minimize the risks to the environment. So before we go for development, like we also need to take care of environmental safeguard. So we need to be very specific, and we need to ensure there is a balance between the development and environmental safeguard. So development, and while developing we are like harming the environment, then I think we are not justifying our needs. So we need to adopt no harm principle for all. What advice you would give to individuals looking to enter the field of policy analysis and development, especially those who are passionate about making a positive impact in agriculture, food security, and climate policy? So yeah, so the policy or in try and to be a part of policy making process, it's very essential, because being in that position, like it always provide you the opportunity to carry the voice of other people, but to represent that group or to be that part, like first you need to be very much clear on your subject. You must need to very much clear about the gap. Where is the gap, and what the message that you want to convey, and how you want to contribute in that policy formulation process. So some people, they just want to be part of that process, and just want to witness like how the policy is being formulated. But in my opinion, like beyond witnessing the policy formulation process, if you have that kind of willpower that you could make a significant change in that process, then it add more values rather than just witnessing the process. So So first and foremost thing is identify the gap. Where is the gap in agricultural sector, or what are the linkages between the agriculture and climate change? How we could give the justice to the climate victims or the farmers who are struggling because of climate impacts. So if you have that kind of evidences, if you have that kind of direct message, then it will be very comprehensive and it will be very valuable for the policy makers as well to include you in that process. So first you need to prove yourself that you have that kind of ability that you could make a significant change while you are in that policy formulation process. Is there any other questions? Okay, so yeah, so like a policy, sometimes policy is a guiding dog, and beyond the policy, we also need to see like the act and regulation. So in the case of Nepal, first the policy is being formed, and policy it try to capture all the essence, and to implement or to provide some kind of guiding for the implementation of policy, government they formulate act and regulation. That act and regulation it gives some kind of roadmap in advising how these policies will be translated or how these policies will be implemented. So to create a kind of balance or to support our farmers or livelihood, ensuring food security, like identify like whether the act and the regulations related to agriculture is well enough to respond that issues. If not, then it's now an opportunity for you to communicate that gap through policy paper to that stakeholder, like who were engaged in that policy formulation process, or maybe like you could submit a kind of submission to the designated authority, for example, Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. So that kind of the opportunities are always there.
Okay, so I think most of the questions have been covered. So is there anyone who want to unmute yourself and ask a question to our trainer? This is one last time. You can express your concern regarding the policy paper making process. Okay, seeing no response. So finally, so it's a pleasure, sir. Once again, thank you so much, sir, for tackling each and every question in a smooth way. It reminds how dedicated you are and how expertise in your field. So it's really wonderful to hear your experience in the working process regarding the policy paper making and how it goes actually. So one more question might be from the Amresh Kumar Yadav. So I think this question is already addressed. So we will not be taking any question now. Okay, so I would like to take a moment now to express our deep appreciation to our trainer, Mr. Rajan Thapa sir. Your dedication, expertise, and commitment to empower this next generation of agriculture leaders have made a profound impact on us. So as a small token of our gratitude, we like to present a token of love. This token of love will serve as a symbol of our appreciation for your valuable contribution to this workshop and more importantly to the growth and development of our participants. So I request technical team to present it. So I like to read the content. So token of love is presented to Mr. Rajan Thapa, National Project Manager, CBIT Project, WWF Nepal, for having as outstanding contribution as a trainer for the virtual workshop on making policy paper for agriculture and climate organized by Food and Agriculture Youth Institute on November 1st, 2023. Your expertise, guidance, and dedication have greatly enriched the learning experience of our participants. Your commitment to empowering the next generation leader in the field of agriculture and climate policy is truly commendable. So thank you so much, sir, for this. And please accept it as a reminder of the lasting impression that you have made today and the difference you continue to make in the world of policy development and advocacy. We hope you displayed it with pride, knowing that you have left a positive mark on all of us. Once again, thank you so much, Rajan sir, for your outstanding work and your dedication to share your mission, vision, and the work progress regarding the policy paper and your engagement. We look forward to collaboration and further opportunity to learn from your expertise. So before concluding the session, so I would like to take some feedback from the participants also, and I'll give floor once again to the Rajan sir how he felt regarding the session and how the questions are being addressed. So I give the floor again to Rajan sir to add some of this point how you feel regarding this session.
Thank you, Pendra, and thank you, organizing team, once again for this interactive session. Organizing session is one thing, but it is always difficult to have this kind of interactive session. So big kudos to all the organizing team, and also big thank to all the participants who have raised their questions. And I don't know whether I was able to answer your question or not. I tried my best, whatever the information that I have or whatever the knowledge that I have gained, through my years of experience. But beyond that, I'm always open. If you have any kind of concerns, queries, or if you want to have more information about the climate change, or if you want to be a part of broader climate discourse in the case of Nepal, please feel free to reach out to me. You could reach out to me either from Facebook, or you could simply send me the email, because my email address has already been shared with the organizing team. So you could ask my email ID to organizing team. So because I always feel privileged that a youth are the agent of change, and if we train them right way, then they could act in a right way. And if we motivate them, and if we tend to include them in this kind of process, then I think it ultimately create a significant change in the broader policy process or the policy making process. So I look forward to collaborate with you all in coming days. And if you want to have more information, or if you want to be a part of similar kind of discourse, then please feel free to reach out to me. Once again, thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. And thank you very much to Upendra for your valuable invitation and for your warm greetings. Thank you.
Okay, so it's wonderful, sir, once again. So it's our pleasure to express our heartfelt appreciation to our trainer, Mr. Rajan sir. So your depth of knowledge and engaging delivery, of course, have a great inspiration for all of us, for empowering his participants for the better understanding of the policy paper making actually. So ladies and gentlemen, we are finally at the end of the session. So it was the session insightful workshop on making policy paper, and it's our pleasure to have most of the participants in this session and active engagement. So on the behalf of FAYI Food and Agriculture Youth Institute and all our participants, we extend our sincere gratitude for Rajan sir to your valuable contribution. So at the concluding remarks, I would like to give a floor to the co-head of FAYI Food and Agriculture Youth